And okay, so we have tonight Daria, who's a medical student at Johns Hopkins, Rahul, who is an emergency medicine resident physician at Stanford, Sneha, who is a resident physician at Northwestern, and Sivan, who's a resident physician at UCSF. So Daria, do you want to go first?
Sure. Hi everyone, my name is Daria. I graduated in 2017, Berkeley Bioengineering. I'm originally from California, so going to Berkeley was kind of being close to home for me. And I took one gap year during which I was applying and kind of just like hanging out with family and like wrapping up some stuff. And so now I'm at Hopkins. I'm in the end of my third year, so doing clinical rotations right now and going to be applying for residency in the fall. So I'll stop there for now and then feel free to ask me questions. Or I can talk more based on what other people talk about and if there's any relevance to my story.
Rahul, you want to go ahead?
Sure. So I'm Rahul. I grew up also in California in the Bay Area, graduated from Berkeley BioE in 2014, stuck around and did the MTM program, which many of you probably know about, and graduated in 2015. Worked a little bit in tech for a little over a year and then went to med school at Virginia Commonwealth in Virginia, and then came out to Palo Alto. I'll try not to say the institution's name since we're repping Berkeley today. And I'm just wrapping up my first year of residency in emergency medicine. And it's a 4-year program here in Palo Alto.
Sneha?
Hi, everyone. My name is Sneha, also from California, the Bay Area. Went to Berkeley and graduated 2013. And I wasn't initially a BioE major. I actually switched in from the College of Letters and Sciences and wasn't initially pre-med either. Thought a lot about doing like grad school or working in industry and going straight through. So I can talk a lot about my decision to, do medicine and what influenced that. I went straight through, I went to med school at UCSF and then matched at Northwestern for internal medicine. I finished residency in June 2020 and stuck around to do a chief year here. And I'm going to be starting ID fellowship at Penn come July. So happy to talk about kind of all of the above and any other questions you guys have.
And Sivan.
Hey guys, I'm Sivan. I am also a Bay Area born and raised. I graduated Berkeley in 2015. I did like tissue engineering, worked in Kevin Healy's lab for quite a few years, including a gap year, then came to UCSF for med school. And now I'm a first year resident in a combined anesthesiology critical care program. So it includes it's 4 years of anesthesia residency and 1 year of critical care fellowship.
Okay, we had some questions actually emailed in, so I'm gonna throw some of those at you and feel free to add on. What types of things did you do during your summers as an undergrad to prepare for med school? And you're gonna have to sort out between you who's gonna take that.
I can start out, I guess. I'll just go sequentially for what I did over my different summers. So summer between first and second year, I remember I went home back to Southern California. And at that time I was kind of thinking about, okay, what classes are needed to apply for med school and what classes am I going to take at Berkeley? So I'm not sure if this is still the case, but at the time there was like a psychology, sociology kind of soft recommendation, but not necessarily a requirement. So I wasn't sure if I necessarily wanted to use my time at Berkeley to take that as a breadth. So I did summer school at a community college near my house at Orange County Community College, OCC, if anyone, actually no, I think I did IBC. Anyways, it was a community college that I did a sociology class at one summer. and that I was able to transfer credits and as well as like add that class to my transcript when I was applying. Second summer, so between second and third year, I did an internship in industry, DSM Biomedical. It's in near Berkeley, actually. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that. That I think I was kind of trying to explore, like still just in case, like see if I wanted to do industry or not, maybe forego the pre-med route, give that a try. Quickly realized that was not for me. So that was a good experience to learn that by myself. And then third summer, in between third and fourth year, is when I studied for the MCAT, and I took the MCAT because I knew that I didn't want to apply straight through. So I was going to do my applications after graduation rather than during fourth year. So I had a little bit more time. I think if you want to apply straight through, you may or may not have to do the MCAT a little bit sooner. So I had that summer to take the MCAT.
So I'm trying to remember. I think the first summer, so Sneha and I actually both worked at the Duber Lab together. And so I worked in the Duber Lab the first summer. And then I think I took like some math classes at Berkeley to catch up. And then second summer, I continued working in the Duber Lab and did some more coursework. Third summer, I got a research fellowship in Singapore. So went there and worked for a little bit. And then, yeah, I think that was, yeah, that's it. Yeah.
So my story was a little unique because I was initially in the College of Letters and Sciences. So I had to do some catch-up classes to graduate on time. So my first summer, I took classes. My second summer, I think I took classes and worked in lab with Rahul, actually, Dr. Duber's lab. My third summer, I did the BIE internship, which I loved. I'm happy to talk more about that. I hope hopefully it still exists. I don't know, actually. And then, yeah, there's 3 summers, right? Yeah. So then I did that and then applied fall of my senior year.
I also did mostly research. I think the summer after freshman year, I worked in the Anderson labs in bio. And then summer after that, switched to Healy lab, did tissue engineering things. And at that point, I also became an EMT. And so for most of the other summers, I kind of split my time between doing research and volunteering as an EMT. And then the summer right before senior year, I also studied for and took the MCAT.
Okay, those are some busy summers. Are there aspects of being a bioengineer that you feel gave you an kind of an edge over non-bioengineering classmates in medical school? They help you solve problems better, or anything that made you kind of different or better or worse suited?
I thought it kind of set me apart during interviews for medical school. A lot of people who apply to medical school have a more traditional biology background, but not all do. But I think being an engineer, there were certainly different talking points that I could talk about. Projects that I'd worked on, like some of my medical device work, why I was interested in this area, how I wanted to kind of combine my interest for medicine with engineering. So I thought it helped a lot during the medical school interview process. Now being a physician, less so, but I think it just depends on what you want to do later on. Like if you want to do consulting or if you want to go back into industry, I think it's cool to have that background.
And kind of to add on to that, I think it really depends on what specialty you end up in, which is kind of impossible to know until you go through med school. Some of them have a lot more of an engineering type mindset where we think a lot, use, math and kind of a quantitative approach to things more than others. That's actually kind of part of what drew me to anesthesia, is there's a lot of the pharmacology and the kind of physiology uses a lot of the concepts that I felt like I picked up in engineering and kind of made things a lot more intuitive. The one place where I think that maybe we're at a little bit of a disadvantage during the preclinical times of medical school is that our education as engineers focuses a lot less on memorization of large amounts of material. And so kind of when you come to medical school, you have to get used to an education system that just expects you to memorize a whole lot of material without necessarily having this like mechanistic background for it. And I found that pretty difficult and kind of a change in learning style that you get used to. And I think once you can do both, you're in a better place than the people who have just learned to memorize everything. But it's definitely a challenge in the beginning.
To add on to that point, about the preclinical thing. So a lot of people who are MCV majors, for example, a lot of their classes, some of what they learn gets repeated during preclinical years, for example, like genetics or immunology. So for BioE, we do have the like upper division bio class, like one of your requirements that you have to take. I did genetics as mine, and actually it did come in handy. If I had done immunology, it probably would have been really helpful, but I avoided doing that because I knew it was going to be difficult. So I just pushed that off until med school. So if you guys do want to kind of use those breadth requirements, it's definitely something you can do to kind of set yourself up for getting exposed to that material a little sooner. I also agree, bioengineering, I think, does give you kind of a different viewpoint when you're thinking about the course material. I often did find myself thinking more about like the mechanisms behind a lot of things, maybe than classmates. A lot of classmates are just like, okay, what is like A leads to B leads to C, like to memorize it for the test. I don't know, maybe they also think about the mechanisms, but personally, it helped me to think about it that way, like kind of understand the bigger picture of how a lot of different things relate to each other. And I find that's how I learn really well, is having everything like in front of me and being able to see the connections. And I don't know if that comes from engineering or what, but it helped me with being able to learn things easier without necessarily having to just memorize all the facts independently.
I think I agree with what everyone here has said. I was just going to add a little bit more on the admission side. So in my fourth year of med school, I was on our school's my med school's admissions committee, and definitely, being in engineering, having a little bit more of a rigorous curriculum is sometimes respected. And it's seen as, even if you have, a couple classes that you didn't do as well in, they recognize that you're in engineering. You took a pretty rigorous course load on top of, all the requirements and prereqs to apply to med school. So that's just another thing to think about.
Jess, you had a question?
Sorry, should I just start my video or keep going like this? Talking. Hello. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Jess. I'm a grad student in the MTM program, actually. So really great to hear from you, Rahul. I'm wondering about, based on my experience in the MTM program, I'm very interested in the long future, working as a physician in innovation, maybe bringing some products back to programs like the MTM, while also balancing clinical time. And I know that's something that might change over the years, but I was just wondering, in your programs, do they have a focus or allow students to kind of take an interest in research and innovation in addition to your coursework? Is that something that they encourage, or it's kind of on you to pursue on your own? Or how would you suggest looking for that as I look for med programs to apply to?
And so are you asking about that from medical school or in residency?
Whichever you feel is most appropriate. I don't know at what point. I think in preparation from residency, I've heard it's recommended that you start doing research in medical school. I'm learning a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. So in medical school, I actually didn't do as much biotech work through my med school, but based on some of the connections and my friends who I had from my MTM and Berkeley years, I just continued working on side projects around biotech. And now in residency here, there's we have a pretty good, there's a business school here with, very hungry MBA students trying to churn out ideas, and they're always looking for physicians to vet their sort of clinical ideas. And so I think in residency, there's been more time and more opportunity. Whereas I think most of medical school, I tried to do some clinical research to see what that was like, because I had never done any sort of clinical research in undergrad. So I wanted to see what that was like. And I knew that I was working on sort of, tech ideas in the background, but nothing officially through the school, through my med school. And it's also maybe because where I went to med school, they didn't have any official sort of like avenue to do tech or biotech sort of stuff. But it was something I always wanted to do. And that's sort of why I came to where I'm at residency now. So yeah, I mean, in the future, I definitely want to continue to use my MTM degree. So, and I worked for a little bit actually after MTM. So that's what sort of solidified that I wanted to do that.
I think one thing that's probably super important if you do want to continue your kind of BioE work is, try and apply and go to a medical school and residency after that maybe also has an engineering program or kind of those resources available, because it's going to be a lot easier to find collaborators and to kind of work on these projects and have things going if there are people kind of close by. It's pretty hard to kind of, while you're doing medical school, especially in the like third year, when you're kind of really busy with rotations, or when you become a resident and you're working kind of pretty long hours, to independently kind of pursue a lot of these projects. And so I think it's pretty helpful to have collaborators that you can work with and can kind of help move the ball forward, even when you're kind of physically busy yourself. And so just kind of figuring out a place that's going to support that is going to be key.
Also, there is the option of doing a research year in med school. So my roommate actually, she's really involved in like innovation and device design and things like that. And she had time to do that because she did a research year. So a lot of that, like, I think she started all the things she was involved in, like right before she entered the research year. And then a majority of the work was done over that year. So if that's something that you're really interested in, I would go to med school also that is like research heavy. Like there's going to be a lot of mentors that do research so that you can find the right one for you, because not everyone who does research is going to be doing like device or like innovation type research. Like they might do more clinical research like Rahul was mentioning, or they might do more like QI research. So that's not necessarily the exact thing that you seem like you're looking for. So going to a program that has a wider breadth of research interest, so that's generally like bigger academic institutions, a lot of them will have that. That'll be a better way to find that for you.
Thanks, Joel. Athea, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you all for sharing your stories. I wanted to ask a little bit about a non-traditional pathway to med school. So I'm currently a third-year BioE MSc major and unsure about what I want to do, where I want to go. So for right now, the plan is to enter industry or potentially a grad school program after undergrad. But what are your guys' thoughts on maybe if I'm working in industry and like 2 years in, I'm catching up on like some of the prereqs that I didn't get a chance to take in undergrad at a community college? What would that look like on a med school application? Because a lot of the times you hear that med school admissions don't really like seeing that you took some of your prereqs at community college. But if I were to do this in 2 years while working in industry at the same time, would that have any other kind of weight or any opinions on that?
I think that would be fine. And the reason why I say that is because Berkeley's undergraduate bachelor's degree, especially in engineering, carries a lot of weight. So regardless of where you do your prerequisites for medical school, if you've done well in undergrad at Berkeley, I think that speaks volumes as to, the type of student you are and the type of clinical like rigor you'd be able to do in medical school. So I think that's totally fine. Plus you can, as long as I think in terms of having the more non-traditional path, I was part of the admissions committee in medical school too. And what we always like to hear from students was basically hear their story, what their motivations were. And you can really tell when people have a genuine passion in something and they try it out and they figure out, hey, this is not right for me. And that comes across. And I think people just like to hear that in the interview process or in the personal statement. So, if you're hesitant about what you want to do, I would highly suggest you try industry out. If you don't like it, take prerequisite classes and apply. It's not going to hurt you in the future. It will only help, I think.
Great, thank you.
Katie, you had a question?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for coming. So I just wanted to ask, how did you really decide that medicine was for you? Was there like an experience you did, or did you do shadowing, or was there like a clinical experience you had that helped you really decide that you wanted to do it? Because it's like with COVID, it's kind of hard for a lot of us students to like remember why we're studying for hours and stuff. So is there something that we can look forward to that helped you decide on medicine?
So I definitely was in the boat of thinking during undergrad whether like what I wanted to do. I definitely wasn't set on going to med school from the start. That's kind of something I had in my mind, but hadn't completely decided on. So I mentioned that I had done an internship between my second and third year in industry, and that really helped me like kind of get a sense of like what it's like working, as well as I would go to like grad school panels and things like that. I was like thinking about maybe grad school, and then also I did do some shadowing as well as like hospital volunteering, things like that, to like get you in the hospital, see like what people do day to day during their shifts. So I think my approach was really try to like see what all the different options were and what I could do, and like try putting myself in the shoes of like each of those different career paths, like seeing like what could I see myself doing like 10, 20 years from now? Like what would my life look like? Does that seem fun for me? And just like seeing how like viscerally like how that feels for you. So I know it's probably might be difficult doing shadowing right now for COVID, but hopefully you guys might be able to go soon. Or even if you can't shadow like in hospitals, you can try reaching out to maybe more community practice people. They might be able to like help you guys get in a little bit. Just like reach out to them and be like, I'm a Berkeley bioengineering, interested in going into med school, and like kind of tell your story. And even if they can't help, you can see if they can like connect you with someone to do some shadowing. Because I do think that's important to see if you've never seen that before, to get that experience.
I think being an engineer, we all like to like solve problems. And that's what I really loved about medicine. I mentioned I did the BIE internship, and I think that really solidified it for me. It was the perfect, I think, like combination of both clinical medicine and also some of the engineering problems we work on. Even though I don't use a lot of my engineering background right now, it's still like the skill set and the way we were trained in undergrad that I like still use every day. And now all the problems we think about and all the problems we want to solve are just in the human body versus like, you know, on a device or in cells or tissues or whatever like that. And I love it. So I think the biggest thing you do as a physician is you interact with people all day, every day. So you have to be able to, you have to like that. And you have to, it depends on the specialty for sure, but you have to have some component of wanting to talk to people, wanting to listen, and wanting to be a detective and investigate and, you know, figure out what's going on.
I think medicine kind of has two components, as we kind of talked about. There's the like science and kind of liking the science of medicine. And then there's also the practice of it and like dealing with the people and kind of actually physically, you know, implementing whatever kind of treatments and taking histories and things like that. It's something that's kind of hard to know whether you're actually going to like unless you do it. And so kind of that's why I did that EMT program I kind of mentioned. I wasn't really sure if I was going to enjoy the actual physical practice of medicine. And I thought EMT school, which they had on campus, and I think they still might, although I don't know about how COVID has affected it, really let me kind of do patient care myself in a, you know, having some responsibility. It's not the same as being a doctor, but it does kind of let you know whether you like being the one that's caring for the patient. And kind of the more I did that, the more I really enjoyed it. And that kind of, I was also considering grad school versus med school, and that's really what solidified it for me.
Yeah, I think for me, I volunteered a little bit. So UCSF had a volunteering program back when I was when I was in Berkeley BioE, and did a couple of years there just to understand, because I'd never had patient exposure, seeing what it's like taking care of a sick patient. Obviously, as a volunteer, you're not really taking care of them. I was delivering books or newspapers, things like that, just to see what it's like being in a hospital and interacting with patients. But I think for me, what really solidified it was when I was working in industry. The startup that I was working at didn't have a very good clinical team, and I saw that that was a huge weakness. And I felt that there was a need for engineers who had a really good clinical understanding, so they could build tools that were clinically relevant. And so that's actually what motivated me to go to medical school.
Okay, sorry, my space bar stopped working for unmute. Adrian, you have a question?
Yeah, I'll turn on my camera for a little bit, but then I have family running around, so just in case that happens, I'll turn off my camera again. I'm a senior right now, and I just started like looking into medical schools and figuring out which ones to apply to. And I wanted to ask you all, how did you decide on which schools to turn in your applications to? Because there are just so many, and sometimes it's kind of overwhelming.
I guess I can start since I think I'm most recent to the process. So I think it might be kind of taboo to say, but a good starting point is honestly looking at your numbers, like your grade, your GPA, and your MCAT score, and that can kind of give you a sense of approximately what like competitiveness of med school is reasonable for you to apply. Because I know like during the application process, like a lot of people talk about people who go like without getting into a med school. And I do think a big component of that is people who are unrealistic with themselves about where they honestly fall in competitiveness for schools. So if you kind of like the whole know thyself thing and apply to appropriate like for your numbers, that's a great place to start. And then once you have that like chunk of schools, important things are, what are you looking for in a med school? Are you looking for somewhere that has like really great like public health involvement? Like, do you want to maybe do an MPH? Do you want somewhere that has a ton of research? Do you want somewhere that's like in a big city, so really diverse populations that you get to take care of? Do you want somewhere that is like close to home? And that's totally fine. It's honestly a very valid thing to consider. So you need to think about for yourself, like what are your important categories that you need to have in a school to be able to support you becoming an excellent physician. And once you have like a couple things that like are really important to you, you can look at schools' websites, and schools will, you might think like, okay, like all the schools are the same, like how do you tell? There will be things they try to advertise about themselves, like things they're really proud of. And those are the things that they care about and put effort into like promoting on their pages. And so that that that's going to be something that's important for the school. For example, if they like talk about their like there's a bunch of whatever about their let's say like free health clinic that med students can be involved in, there's like a whole like blog post or something about that. You're like, okay, this is something the school cares about and prioritizes. So if that's something that's important to me, like that's a good fit. And so that's another way you can kind of look at schools and see which ones fit your criteria. Because once you do interviews and like you talk to the school, it's not just about like, oh, which school will like me. It's also like which school will help support you as a student, help get you to your goals. And they're looking at that too. Like they want people that fit their school. So sometimes like if people don't get into a school, you're like, oh, like kind of sad, like why didn't they like me? But like they're looking at like maybe you wouldn't have been a good fit there anyway. So honestly, it can be a blessing in disguise sometimes based on where you get in, because they're also looking to make that good match.
Yeah, I think something that is really hard to appreciate until you're actually in medical school is how important the core material of medical school is kind of the same everywhere, no matter if you're like a top ranked program or a non-top ranked program. And really it's those kind of other things, the values of the school, the things you find important, and what like opportunities the school can offer you to help, do what you want to do with your career, that I think are more important. So like for me, the things that I kind of prioritized in making the list, using those same kind of things, figuring out where my numbers fit, but then also I knew I wanted to have an engineering presence. So I looked at places and kind of cross-referenced it with places that I knew were good at bioengineering. And I talked to my PI to kind of figure out where those were. And then location is obviously, do you want to live in a small city? Do you want to live in a big city? And I think you kind of have to apply broadly, and you can't limit yourself too much, just because it is a very nebulous process and hard to predict. I think even more so with COVID, where you're doing everything by Zoom, and so it's hard to really get to know a place beforehand, and it's going to be hard for them to get to know you. So I think applying more broadly than you think you need to is probably the safer thing to do. And then figuring out, what your values are, what you think is going to be important for you moving forward in your career, and then trying to figure out what places support that. And the way to do that, I think it can be pretty hard. I agree, looking at the website and seeing what they stress, but then also if you know someone who's in medical school or a physician, I'm kind of asking them and talking to them about it's probably going to be your greatest resource, because once again, it's kind of hard to know these things from the outside, but then once you've kind of been in the system, you get to know details about places that you wouldn't have otherwise. And I'm not going to speak for anyone else here, but I'm happy to, if you guys have questions about particular places, feel free to email me afterwards and I can kind of give some advice.
A couple of things I'll add to that. Medical school in your third and fourth year, you rotate in different hospitals. So sometimes some medical schools are affiliated only with like academic centers, some are affiliated with BAs, some are also affiliated with general hospitals that are more like the safety net, serve the safety net population of a particular area. So for me, I knew I wanted to work in an underserved population after training. So for me, it was really important to get some sense of what that would look like in medical school. So that really helped me narrow down the schools I was interested in applying to, and ultimately knew I would go there if I got a acceptance. So think about that as well. The VA serves like a veteran population, also kind of historically underserved and have their own unique health problems. And I will say, we live in a world where numbers matter, unfortunately, but at the same time, don't sell yourself short, because numbers are only one very, very small piece of the story. And you guys all bring like very unique attributes and experiences to whatever medical school you choose to go to. And please highlight those in your like personal statements and the activities you write about, because people will read that and they will be like, wow, Adrienne, you did this. That's so exciting. Like, I want to hear more about that. So it's okay to aim high, even if you feel like your numbers might not be as competitive, because you never know what's going to happen. And with more schools doing holistic reviews, you should give yourself the best shot you have.
I completely agree with Sneha. A personal statement is an important thing, and I think sometimes people don't realize that and feel that it's just a numbers game. But yeah, I think my advice, like everyone else, also like Daria and Sivan also said, was like apply broadly. I think that's very key.
I will add one more thing, that actually like think about the school too. Like, don't apply somewhere that you wouldn't go if you got in, because then you're just wasting your time and your money and your energy. So like actually think about it, like, okay, if this is the one place I got in, would I go here? And if it's like some city that you're like, no, I never want to move there, then don't apply. Like, don't waste your time. Pick somewhere else. There's so many other places you can pick. So it might sound obvious, but just like think about it, even before you send your primary, because you don't want to waste the like $30 or whatever it is.
One other thing I was going to say was schools take the decision process like pretty seriously. Like, there's a lot of time spent on deciding, whether they're going to admit an applicant or not. So like everyone that gets a yes has been very thoroughly vetted. So it's just like how they're choosing you. It's also you get a say in if you want to choose them.
Thank you. Athea, you have another question?
Yeah, I actually had two more questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
My first being, obviously medical school and residency and all that is very, very rigorous. How did you find managing your academic life with, other stuff in your life, just generally?
I found the first 2 years of medical school, I had a lot more free time than I did at Berkeley. So that felt really nice. I think as engineers, we work harder than we realize compared to many other people. And so it actually felt like a breather the first 2 years. I think that switches when you get to third year, and then you are working probably more than you have at any other point in your life, just in terms of hours. It's, you're there at the hospital very early, often leaving not, very late, and often there working 6 days a week. And then in residency, that just kind of continues for minimum 3 years. So I think time management as you get farther along becomes more important. And you kind of have to plan what activities and hobbies and things you want to do outside. Because it's very easy to say, I'm tired, I've been working a lot, I don't want to do anything. And having a lazy day is always nice, but I think it's important to keep up those hobbies and things like that, because even though this work is amazing and super rewarding, I don't think it's a good idea to make that your entire life. And it's important to keep those things that make you unique, and you're not going to be just a doctor, you're going to be a person too.
I definitely agree with that. There's literally always more studying to be done. Like, as I say this, I like have in the back of my head like 5 different things that I like need to be doing eventually. And the reality of the fact is, like, you're just not going to finish all of it sometimes, and that's okay. You need to prioritize the other things that are important in your life, like cooking yourself meals, like going outside into the world, like spending time with friends. You're never going to finish everything, so you just need to like stop at some point and be like, okay, I'm going to stop at this time, and I have like this dedicated amount of time to have fun, or like do what makes me happy, like make what is like stress relieving for me. And you have to plan that into your schedule, because if you don't, you can just like study forever. So you just need to be very intentional about what time you're setting aside for yourself.
And then another,
Go
go ahead, sorry.
No, go ahead, Scott.
Okay. And say another thing that kind of makes you feel better about that, because I think up until now, you guys have probably all kind of been trained that unless you are trying your hardest all the time and getting all A's, it's probably, not good enough. But once you're in medical school, there are some specialties that are more competitive than others, and you may need to do well on a few tests and a few boards. But otherwise, if you're passing, you are going to be a doctor. And I think that could be a lot of stress relieved, meaning that like you don't have to be the best in the class. Everyone in the class is going to be an excellent doctor. And so it's okay not to always be at the top of the class, and kind of accepting that the average in your class is still exceptional.
I was just going to add to what Sivan said in the very beginning about, I think, the first couple years of medical school. I feel like you're very well prepared. Nice, Daria, I like that. Being maybe on par with what you're doing at Berkeley, if not maybe a little bit easier, just because of the rigor that you have in your first few years at Berkeley. Like, I still remember like the first 2 years of undergrad being like insanely difficult with the pre-med curriculum and like physics 7A and 7B and all of that stuff. So yeah, that was one thing I was going to say. Second thing, when you're talking about sort of the whole like P equals MD, thinking back to like medical schools that you want to choose. So the med school I went to, actually, our curriculum was pass fail. So our first 2 years of medical school, like your grades were like, no one knew if you got a 95 or you got a 70 and passed a course. It was either pass or fail. So I think that's another thing that alleviates a lot of stress sometimes, and can sometimes foster a collaborative environment, because people want to study and teach each other so that you can, truly do well on your board exams. And yeah, I completely agree with Sivan. Like, going to a pass fail preclinical school is I think the way to go. And I think a lot of schools, if I'm not wrong, are moving towards that.
I will definitely agree with that. Actually, so for my school, for clerkships, we are typically graded, but because of COVID and like a bunch of schedules being moved around, so we're actually pass fail for clerkships this year. And that is definitely a great thing, allowing me to be here with you guys tonight instead of studying a little bit. But that's not common. And I think we might be switching back to grades. They're still figuring it out after COVID, but definitely pass fail preclinical is a key thing to look into. And a lot of times you might not be able to find that when you're picking which schools to apply to, but that's definitely something you can find out during the interview, and you can ask during the interview.
Claire, you have a question?
Hi, yes, thank you so much. This is actually a really specific question. Since I'm preparing for the application cycle, and this seems like the perfect place where there's BioE pre-meds. Did you guys count your upper division classes as BCPM? Because if you remember, because it's really hard to find information on this because it's like very niche.
Yes, you should do
Yes,
it
I
if
did.
it'll help you.
Okay.
Yes, if it helps your GPA, do it.
Yeah. I think there's a couple classes that sometimes they reclassify, but I mean, whatever you feel it fits into BCPM, like I think you guys would also agree, right? I think I would aim for it.
Okay, thank you
I
so
would
much.
err on the side of like being a little more generous with the classification if it like makes sense. If it's like 115, like that's, yes, you're doing cell bio, that's bio. Okay, yeah, obviously. If it's like a little more like on the edge case, but like look at the syllabus. If you really want to, you can like look at the syllabus, and like if it's clearly a BCPM class, even if they reclassify, you can like send them the syllabus and argue. But a lot of times they don't bother reclassifying if it sounds legit. If it's clearly like humanities of like ethics, then like that's not gonna work. But if it's like something kind of gray area, I would do it if it'll help you.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I was getting concerned about that because I saw some posts online that said you couldn't, and a lot of my upper division classes are a lot better than my lower, so got scared. But thank you.
I think the only bioengineering class that I did not classify as that was I think 100, the bioethics.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Thanks. So in general, how are you keeping motivated to study and be productive and do everything you have to do during the pandemic?
Sometimes I feel like the need to self-motivate is out of my hands because I feel the external pressure of upcoming deadlines, but that's probably not the best answer. But no, besides that, I just like remind myself like, okay, like what is my goal? Like my goal is to go to specific specialty residency. Like what do I need to do to get there? And sometimes it is just like a day-to-day, like, okay, what do I need to do today just to like finish this task and get to tomorrow? And that's fine. Like if it's just like I'm just gonna get like one thing done tonight, like at least I got one thing done, and that's better than nothing. And it is hard. It's like the whole COVID burnout thing is very real. Like it's difficult to be on Zoom all day, and it's difficult to not be able to go anywhere, or like go out to eat with your friends easily, or just go do fun things. And I think finding other ways to like see people is really important too, to like give yourself a break sometimes and allow that like stamina to build back up.
If I can add on to the question, so you all applied to medical school and got started before the pandemic. Has going through this COVID thing changed how you feel in any way? Made it weaker, stronger, changed your plans?
I think it's shown me how important the work we do is. I already knew it, but it reinforces it.
Yeah, I think it just, sorry, Rahul, I think it
Go
just
for it.
shows you like what a privilege it is to be able to go through medical school and have the skills that we gain and be able to actually give back to your community in some way or form. It's hard, it's really hard. It's not easy most days, but at the end of the day, I think it's incredibly meaningful and impactful.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think especially starting residency in the middle of a pandemic, especially in emergency medicine, I have to say, like in the beginning was a little scary, like trying to figure out, hey, am I going to get COVID at some point? Or, and I'm taking care of people who are sick with, a disease that we don't really know much about. If you go back to, March of last year, April of last year, when we still didn't know much about this. And so, I mean, now I feel like I've grown a ton from it. And yeah, I completely agree with Sivan and Sneha are saying.
Thank you. And thank you all for doing this and being out there during this scary time. Katie, a question?
So I was just wondering, because I know a lot of you mentioned that you did a lot of work in labs, and you did research. And so are medical schools, when you're applying, is that something that's like an unspoken thing that you need to have, or can you do more, like, especially since we're bioengineers, can you do more on like the medical device side rather than being in a lab, where there's like pipettes and little, things like that?
Yeah, I think any type of research is valued, right? So like, or sort of the device work you're talking about, right? So I don't think that you have to be in like, an MCB lab or a synthetic biology lab. Maybe you realize like for me, like I did a lot of syn bio research, but realized I enjoyed more like medical device stuff. And that now for me, that's no longer my interest. And I think it changes. So I think it's fine to do what you enjoy. I don't think research necessarily is something required, but I think research, why medical schools like it is it teaches you to think in a certain way. And like reading a literature, like primary literature, which we already learn in bioengineering, but doing that in a lab setting, I think it like shows that you know how to think critically.
And at the same time, I think it depends on how you frame your experiences in undergrad, right? Like you don't need research to shine on your medical school application, but if you like super involved in a particular organization, you had a lot of leadership there, you involved in a lot of projects, and you talk about that, because that's what you're going to do for your research experiences. You talk about your research experiences, the skills you gained, how you reflected on it. So if you're able to do that with any other experience and really show that you've had a lot of growth in that area and you're really genuinely passionate about that, I think that's what really shines in your application. So don't do research just for the sake of doing research. Do an experience for the sake of trying it out, and if you have like a genuine interest in that area. Because I don't think there's a formula that gets you into medical school.
I think going back to when we were talking about the personal statement, I think the number one most important thing from when I was also kind of serving on our admissions committee was your story and kind of how you put that together. Everyone's got grades, everyone did some sort of project in something, but I think what really makes an applicant stand out as unique is kind of having a cool story and something that they're passionate about. For a lot of people that is research, and that's fine because that's an important part of medical school and medicine. But there's a lot more to medicine than kind of the latest biotechnology advances. And I have lots of classmates. UCSF's a pretty research heavy school, but I still have plenty of classmates that did no research in college in their application. And their focus was on, service to their community and or various other things that, as long as you can show your passion and how that's going to translate into medicine, I think that's what medical schools are going to care about more than whatever the thing is itself.
Thank you. So for someone who is considering both grad school and med school, what are your perspectives on the flexibility of like going back to innovation work if you've gone to med school, or do you feel that there are opportunities that you really need to have the PhD for?
I personally haven't looked too much into this, but I do know, like Rocco was mentioning, a lot of startups and a lot of industry have like medical consultants that they need to talk to figure out like the feasibility of what their device, like how feasible their device would be in reality. And like you have the device reps like come in to like basically sell their device to the hospital. Like you need to consult doctors like while you're building that device. So there is a role to be involved in innovation. I don't know how much of that would be like you directly making the new device yourself, like as a sort of PI of a lab, unless you are at an academic institution that you have like your own lab and your own funding and things like that to commit, and that's more of a PI type situation. I'm sure there are always those people who have an MD and then become like CEOs of a company. I don't know how many of those people did residency versus just going back into industry right after med school, because that's also an option that you could do, that some people do. Not super common, but it is an option. So there is an ability to do it. It's not the most common thing to do though, but doesn't mean it's impossible.
I know a lot of the attendings in UCSF do innovation work, and they don't necessarily have PhDs. I will put an asterisk on that, though, that we are still in kind of Silicon Valley here, and I don't know how well that translates to areas outside of this like tech bubble that we're in, where I think there might be more of a bent towards it, and I'm sure it's even more prevalent like that, a few miles south. But I don't really know how that is outside of the Bay Area. So maybe if you guys could comment on that.
I think at least I'm at Northwestern Chicago, and a lot of the people who dedicate a lot of their careers to research, they most often have a PhD. So I think it depends on how you want to split your time, if you want to do more medicine or if you want to do more research. I will also say, I think it depends on what skill set you're looking to gain by doing a PhD. Would a master's in XYZ suffice for that? And sometimes the answer can be yes. So it just depends on what your end goals are, and if you want to stay in more academic setting, where that might be, or if you want to go to more the industry side of things.
I will also say, just like how maybe a PhD might not necessarily answer what you want to do. Sometimes even a master's might not be necessary. Work experience sometimes can give you the same skill set that you might get from a master's program. Of course, with a master's degree, you get the degree, you have a couple more years of education, but even work experience sometimes is valued. And the other thing you should remember is when you're leaving medical school, or once you guys finish medical school, you'll be physicians and engineers, right? So you're in a unique position in the future if you want to ever go back into the tech or innovation side, you have both backgrounds. Because one thing I see a lot in residency is physicians who are not engineers, who are very interested in tech work, who are able to find those opportunities. So you can only imagine having both skill sets that you guys have that makes you even more marketable and powerful.
Also, in case you really, really can't decide, you can do an MD PhD. So you can do both of them.
And Professor Kumar has an MD PhD if you're looking for a faculty member to give you an insight on what that's like. I have one thing to add, which from interacting with our alumni, which is go to the websites, especially startup level, of companies that you think are cool, that you might want to, that are the kind of place where you'd like to do innovation if you're interested in industry, and look at their board and look at their leadership, because a lot of them will have some MDs involved, and you can stalk those people on LinkedIn and see where they've been and what they're doing. And so look for some role models out there. So in medical school admissions, do you feel there's a difference in how important your undergraduate GPA is when you're applying directly out of undergrad, or if you've gone into industry for a couple of years? If you've done that job for a couple of years, does the importance of your undergrad GPA go down?
So where I was at medical school, I felt regardless of, if you had worked or not worked, the undergraduate GPA was still looked at. But that being said, if someone had left medical school or had left undergrad and, had worked for 10 years, there's also, that's noted also, right? That it's been 10 years since they've been in school and they worked. And so, maybe a letter of rec from their employer is something that we look at and hold it in just as high a regard as their GPA. But I think at the end of the day, I think there's no substitute for an undergrad GPA, if that's what the question was sort of getting at.
And I think what I learned is being on the admissions committee is that the Berkeley GPA, people know Berkeley is a hard school, and people know that engineering at Berkeley is super hard. So your GPA will mean a lot. Let's say, I don't know, your GPA compared to another school that does grade inflation, it's still going to be on par with that person who might have a 4.0 from a different school and you don't. But they know that Berkeley grades really hard and they don't give everybody A's. So take that with a grain of salt. Your GPA does not have to be perfect.
In
our admissions committee kind of says, oh, sorry.
That was me. Go ahead.
Our admissions committee kind of says that yeah, they basically say that, you know, there's a certain GPA at which they want to make sure that you are, you know, going to be able to handle the academic workload. And as Sneha is saying, as long as you essentially graduated from Berkeley in bioengineering, they're probably going to think that you can do that. And then outside of that, the more like life experiences that you have that they're going to be considering, the smaller percentage of your application the GPA is going to be. And so I do think it becomes less important the more other things you have to offer.
I want to sort of stress that there's no like optimal life experience. Like there's no one thing, magic bullet. So like all of us have our own unique life experiences, and talking about that and whatever you're interested in and what motivated you to go to medical school is the answer for you. So there's no one right answer. And I'm being very genuine about that, even though I feel like there, you know, a lot of people feel that there is a one way to get in to med school.
Also, you guys correct me if I'm mistaken in this, but from my experience, my impression is like the numbers like GPA, MCAS score, a lot of that is more heavily looked at to consider who you give interviews to. Like once you've gotten an interview, the interview like experience of the interviewers with you and like what they tell the admissions committee is like way important with who actually gets an admission. So sometimes like the application and like your essays and like numbers, that's more to get to the interview stage. And once you're there, it's more of like an even playing field between everyone who got an interview. So make sure like once you get to that stage, just like forget everything that's behind you. Like you can't change any of that anymore. Just like focus on that moment and try to be like genuinely yourself and be personable and have a good experience during the interview, because that becomes really important at that point.
Thank you. So everyone's going to be looking for ways to kind of dip their toe into the clinical world and get some clinical experience, not just for the resume, but for testing it out. And what are some of the things you've seen people do or you've done that are ways to find clinical experiences as an undergrad?
So I think the most common ones are shadowing and volunteering. So volunteering can be like hospital volunteering, but also things like Berkeley Free Clinic. So that's a very involved volunteering experience that's pretty unique to Berkeley because it is completely volunteer run. So if that's something that you're interested in, that's like a great way to get involved with the medical field. Also things like how Savannah was mentioning, he worked as an EMT. That's also pretty involved because it's like a job and you have to go through the training, the certification. Other than that, you can do more like niche things like phlebotomy or just anything that gets you into the healthcare field. It's not all of it is like feasible in terms of how much time it would take to get to that point, but there are definitely a lot of unique ways to go about it. Also things like scribing is another common thing that would be a nice way to be able to be like a fly in the wall and see what the day in the life is like.
I think it's unfortunate that Berkeley doesn't have a medical school like on campus that would make, I think, finding those opportunities a lot easier. But just in terms of like specific places to look and to kind of ask around, I think pandemic is probably going to make it a little bit harder right now. But UCSF, I know I had friends who did UCSF emergency department volunteering. People went to Highland Hospital, and that was a pretty common one. Kaiser tends to be a little bit harder to find opportunities at just because they're a bit more private, less of an educational institution. And then as you're kind of mentioning the EMT program, there's the Berkeley Medical Reserve Corps is the name of the EMT group on campus that you can contact to kind of figure that out if you're interested.
I personally volunteered at the Benny Hoff Children's Hospital in Oakland. It's also a nice place. I think it's affiliated with UCSF, maybe. Yes.
Yeah, UCSF I think bought it in some fashion.
Okay. Yeah.
They merged or something. Yeah, it's a UCSF thing now. And we do have a lot of research partnerships that our faculty know researchers there also. So it can be clinical or it can be kind of researchy there. Katie, do you have a question?
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask, like, because I know some of you went straight through and then others of you did like a master's program or you just took a gap year. And I'm wondering, like, because I've been looking at the classes and planning everything out, and it seems like really hard to fit everything into 4 years. So for those of you who went straight through, kind of how did you manage that? And then if you took a break or you did like a gap year, like how would you spend your time? Because I feel like if you take a year off, you would forget how to study. And I don't know, I just feel like it would be a bad idea, but just like how you would spend your time.
So I went straight through, and I switched colleges and majors. So that meant I had to take classes over the summer. But it wasn't a lot. It was just like maybe 1 to 2 max. And I tried to combine that with other experiences so I could still get my feet wet with what medicine would look like. So I did volunteering, I did research. So yeah, summer classes can be doable with like something else on the side too.
I'm a pretty heavy proponent of a gap year just because I agree it's a lot to try and fit in. And it's also hard to decide if it's really what you want to do. And if you kind of committed yourself too early, it would be a real shame to end up in a career that turned out not to be right for you. So I think taking your time to figure out whether it's really right for you or not is important. And then I think giving yourself some extra time and space allows you to do things like take all of the prereqs that are going to be on the MCAT before actually taking the MCAT, which I think is pretty helpful. In terms of like, how do you not get rusty? I think even taking a gap year is like you graduate and you're already doing your application. It's due basically at the time of graduation. And then that year you spend doing your secondaries, doing your interviews, and then all of a sudden you're in. So it goes by a lot faster than you'd think, and you won't really forget how to study if you're just taking one gap year. And it's great to have some vacation before you like go on this marathon of medicine.
I'm also a proponent of the gap year. So I specifically didn't want to apply during senior year because I knew that's going to take a lot of time, both for doing the applications themselves and also traveling for interviews. I wanted to take Professor Amy Hur's capstone class, and that's a huge time commitment that I don't think I would have been able to do if I was applying during senior year. And I was also really involved with like volunteering, my research, and like other organizations that I wasn't really willing to cut back on. So that's why I did the gap year. And actually during one of my interviews, someone asked me why I took a gap year because like you didn't need to take one. So they might ask you, and when they ask you what you did during your gap year, it's more important that you had something to talk about. You can't say like, oh, I sat at home all day. Like even if you did, you like spin it some way, be like, I spent time with my family, like reconnected with like my grandparents, or like you'll have something to talk about. It's more about how you explain it. And what was I gonna say? Yeah, I agree that you're applying during the most of the year. So I think primaries are due like June, and then you'll do secondaries through summer, and then interviews will be like in the fall to early winter. So a majority of the year will be spent doing applications. So I don't think you really have time to get rusty, but also for doing interviews, being on a gap year is a great way to have more flexibility in scheduling them, as well as adding maybe like a day or so to your travel to explore the city, see like, is this somewhere I'd like to live? That's something I really enjoyed doing, was spending like an extra night in the different cities to just like explore and travel a little bit, because you're already paying for the flight. You might as well just go around a little bit. And along with that, if in-person interviews are a thing this year, every single school I interviewed at had a sort of host program where you can stay with students, and that cuts down the costs of like hotels as well, and you get to talk to them and ask all your questions about like the nitty-gritty about their school program.
Okay. And speaking as a really, really old person who hasn't been in school for a while, once you've been through a science degree program, you never forget how to study. Dang, it is built into your brains now, and you may be rusty for a month, but it will come back right away. And you guys, trust me, it's going to come back. Claire, question?
Hi, yeah, my question's pretty related to the previous question. I'm actually doing the MTM program in the fall. So I'm really excited to hear someone else in the panel did that. But I was wondering what you did in the summer before that. It's like really specific again, but like as short summer things that you could do as a post-grad.
You're talking between undergrad and MTM?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I think I took the MCAT between then. So I studied a little bit for that, and then I've been working a little bit, and I started interning at the end of I think towards like my spring semester of fourth year at like a startup. Well, they're a pretty big company now. You might have heard of them, Berkeley Lights, which has a lot of UC Berkeley like undergrad and grad alum. So I just started working there. There were like 10 people at the time. And so I was doing that and studying a little bit for the MCAT, then took that, and then had a little bit of vacation time before starting MTM, which got really busy as soon as it started, because you try to condense, a year and a half of material into 10 months in that master's program.
Okay, yeah, that was my follow-up question was how did you do interviews with the master's program?
So I didn't actually. I know a few people in my cohort that did, and I think there are people that do it each year, but I went to work after for about a year, and during that, when I was working in tech for a year, I applied then.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
A lot of REUs and especially industry internships will kind of consider you still eligible for the internships they advertise to undergrads, even though you are just now graduating from undergrad. So don't hold off on applying to something that interests you in one of those just because you're going to have your degree.
Thank you.
Adia?
I was going to ask something particular about the prerequisites for med school. So usually they ask for 1 year of biology with lab experience, and as in the BioE curriculum at Berkeley, they don't explicitly ask you to take Bio 1A or Bio 1B. It's all kind of incorporated into our BioE classes. So would you suggest taking, and I know most people do in school, take Bio 1A, 1B for pre-med recs, but if you were to do this after graduating, like while working, would you suggest taking a year of bio classes like at a community college, or just going off of what we did at Berkeley with the BioE curriculum?
So I think that's a little bit hard to answer because when we were all at Berkeley, I think all of us did Bio 1A or some semblance of that. I had a classmate who I know he did or MCB classes with the lab and didn't do Bio 1A. I think the easiest way to answer that and to make sure you're covering your bases is I would honestly call like 1 to 2 or 3 med schools and like explain the situation and ask them if that will fulfill their requirements. And you don't need to tell them your name, like they have no idea who you are. Just tell them you're like applying from Berkeley. This is your class situation. Like, will that count for requirements? Because I don't know like how strictly they take it. And if they like very specifically want you to have that bio lab class and you don't have it and they just like throw out your application, like that's horrible. So I would recommend calling them, and they have people in the admissions office who like should know all the answers to this because that's their job and they can give you a much better answer.
Yeah, I completely agree with Daria on that. I know some schools will specifically say like you need a year of like general biology versus like I know some schools will be like a year of any sort of biology with a lab class, and operative can count for that. But I think the best way is like if that's not on a school's website, like email or ask. I don't think that question will ever hurt you or harm you in the admission process.
Yeah, like you don't need to tell them your name if you're worried about like, oh, they're gonna know that like they're gonna think I'm trying to like get out requirements. Like no, they have no idea who you are. It's fine.
There are specifically pre-med advisors in the Career Center who may also be able to help out with some of these articulation questions. And for our panelists, we have significantly revamped the BioE curriculum since you've been here, and we have we don't require Bio 1A anymore. We have our own biology classes like 115, we have BioE 11 and stuff. So
Also on that note, Pam,
Yeah.
so in addition to the pre-med advisor in the Career Center, you can also go to the advisors in the MCB department. I did that like
Yeah.
once or twice. They sometimes, because a lot of more MCBs apply to pre-med, so sometimes they have additional answers / shorter waiting times. So you can go there.
Go wherever works. And, you know, when you're trying to meet alumni who have gone to graduate school, there are several pre-med student groups on campus that I'm sure keep in touch with their alumni if you're looking for people who've gone to specific schools. And so join the student groups too, if you want. Braden, how medical focused your gap year? Does it need to be medical focused? Is there anything else to take into account?
Yeah, this is a question for Rahul specifically, who just mentioned that you worked for a year. You know, was it a medical engineering job? Could you talk about that?
Yeah, no. So I was a systems engineer at Theranos, and so it wasn't. I didn't do much clinical work. I mean, there was some clinical work, but it wasn't like patient facing. I was working on a device that we had been building. I was working on our on more research and like analysis of the data that we were working on that particular device. So it really like was never patient facing. And yeah, no.
Thanks.
Leslie.
Yeah, I had a question about like recommendation letters. So I know I saw online that like medical schools prefer letters from professors that taught you in your like core science courses like bio, chem, physics, but the class sizes are so large at Berkeley, and I feel like the professors or GSIs they go through so many students that they won't remember you or um like or they'll just write a really generic spec letter. So I was wondering how you all kind of went around that or dealt with that.
I didn't have, yeah, just like Savannah, I didn't have any letters from any of my lower div classes. I don't know, Daria or Sneha, if you guys did.
I'm trying to remember. I definitely had 2 or 3 bioengineering letters. One was my research PI, who I also took a class with, Professor Mofrad. The other one was Dorian Liebman. He was someone who taught me in a class as well as faculty advisor for one of my organizations. So like I kind of tried like double dip with a lot of my letters to like so they could talk about more things in the letter. Yeah, so I didn't get lower div. I got a letter from a humanities professor because I think that's like a requirement for a letter. Other than that, I had a letter from volunteering. And I don't remember what the last one was, but I didn't do lower division bio or physics or anything.
I think the most important thing is having the letter come from someone who knows you well and can kind of talk about you. I think that having a kind of formulaic letter from someone who clearly doesn't know you very well does nothing for you, even if it comes from a very prestigious person. Whereas even if they're not a very famous faculty member, if they know you and could talk about how impressive your work was in their class or in the lab that you worked with them or whatever, I think that goes a lot farther.
I think some of the upper div BioE classes, if they're still the same sizes, like some of them are relatively small, and you get one-on-one time with the faculty, especially if you work like on I think I remember from some of our upper div classes, like there was a long-term project or a research project, and like you go to office hours with the GSI or the faculty, they get to know you. So I got letters from I think those classes, like I'm trying to remember who. Actually, I don't know. I don't think he's a faculty anymore at Berkeley, but yeah. So I think maybe 2 or 3 out of my like 4 were from BioE faculty.
Terry Johnson frequently offers advice from his like 100 of letters he has to write a year that do not throw in a letter from someone who doesn't know you well, because all they can say is that yes, they were in my class and they got an A, but they probably can't pick you out of a lineup. So do not waste a letter on someone you just took a class with who's not going to remember you well.
Yeah, that's specifically why like some of my letters were people I had been involved with multiple different avenues. Like not only do they teach me in class, but like I did something else with them, because that gives them perspective on like different parts of your personality and more things to write about.
I think from like admissions committee last year, the letters that stood out to me the most, and I think Daria, Sivan, and Nick, since you guys have done it, maybe you can also pitch in, but the ones that stood out to me the most were like faculty or a writer that said, like, I would want this person to be my physician. I think that really like, and they didn't just say that, they had qualities that they wrote about, and that was like, whoa, if someone's saying that, that truly means something.
Thanks. Claire?
Hi, yeah. I was wondering if you guys kind of related to your stories that you were telling earlier, how you thought about your personal statement, what it was generally about, or like tips or resources that you know of for writing it.
Start early. And I went through like 20 drafts, but that's because I'm not the strongest writer. So I wanted to get all my ideas out and end up with something that I actually liked. Show it to people who you trust their opinion, but don't show it to too many people, because personal statements are just that, they're personal. So everyone's going to have thoughts about how to write it, what to say, but show it to like, 3-ish people to see, catch grammar errors, catch syntax errors, and also to evaluate the content. And then the last thing, biggest like don't do, and something I see that's done a lot, is your personal statement should not be a rehashing of your CV or your resume, because that's what your resume is for, right? Your personal statement is to talk about what you learned through your experiences, what your reflection was, what was your growth, why you're choosing medicine, the more like personal aspect of it. So use it for that, and don't just be like, I did this, I presented my work here, I became president here. Like that doesn't do you any good. So think about the story and the theme that you want to bring to your personal statement, and then use your experiences to kind of back that up.
I would say don't feel, go ahead, Daria.
No, you can go, Ripple. Okay, I was gonna say I definitely agree with Sneha about not making it sound like a rehash of your CV, because your entire application, you have to think of it as a whole picture. Like they're gonna have your CV, they're gonna have your personal statement, they're gonna have your secondaries. You want all of them to complement each other. So if, for example, you talk about like why you want to go into medicine and like some like volunteering that you did in your personal statement, like don't repeat that in your secondaries. Like talk about something different. But they all need to like mesh, like they need to support each other. For example, we talked about like volunteering outreach. You can do like how you did outreach and teaching or something like that in the secondaries. You want it all to paint a whole picture of yourself, and use all the space very wisely. Don't like repeat things because it's a waste of space. Don't like definitely use up all the space that you have, because you want to be able to show as much as you can of yourself to the people reading the application, and give them as much opportunity to get to know you through the written paper before they can interview you. And for my personal statement, I think if I'm remembering correctly, I definitely like talked about bioengineering, because when people like look at your application, there's gonna be like certain things that stick out to them. Like bioengineering is gonna be one of them. Like if you did a ton of like high school outreach or something, like that might stick out to them. So you can look at your application and see like what are the big things that you did. And like obviously those are important things to you. So those are easy ways to start out thinking about where you want your personal statement to go. And that also gives your interviews like a good place to start to ask you questions. Like they can like skim your personal statement really quick for the interview, and they can like ask you something from there.
I agree with everything everyone has said. I think you want to make sure that it's not a CV. And I think if you find yourself trying to stick in more than 2 or 3 different experiences that you've had over the last few years and how those relate to you wanting to be a doctor, that might be too many. And try and figure out which of these are really necessary to the story that I'm telling of why I want to be a physician and why I'll be a good physician, and see how many of them you can cut. I think less is more.